Hi everyone, my name is Jonathan Loach and I'm the Communications Officer at Newcastle University's Great North Museum, Hancock. It's a pleasure to introduce today's lecture by Andrew Parkin, Collecting Classical Antiquity, Brian B. Shefton, 100 Years. Andrew Parkin is Keeper of Archaeology at the Great North Museum. His background is in archaeology and museum education, with over 25 years' experience working with archaeology collections. He's also been employed as a lecturer and secondary school teacher, focusing on ancient history and archaeology. He is co-editor of the 2016 book On the Fascination of Objects, Greek Art in the Shefton Collection, and he developed the current Shefton Gallery of Greek and Etruscan archaeology in the Great North Museum. Andrew has extensive experience of curating temporary exhibitions, including Lindoman, Body of Evidence in 2009, and The Extraordinary Gertrude Bell in 2016. I hope that you will enjoy the lecture.
In this lecture, I want to talk about the career of Professor Brian Shefton, whose 100th birthday, August the 11th, 2019. Brian was responsible for establishing the Greek archaeology collection that is now housed in the Shefton Gallery of the Great North Museum, Hancock in Newcastle. This collection is undoubtedly Brian Shefton's most visible and significant legacy, but it should be viewed within the context of Brian's academic career and life. Brian was born Bruno Benjamin Sheftolowitz on August the 11th, 1919, a date he always told me also marked the beginning of the Weimar Republic in Germany. This image shows Brian alongside his elder brother Kurt. Brian was the son of Isidor Isaac Sheftolowitz and his wife Frieda. His father was a professor of Indo-Iranian philology at Cologne University and was also a rabbi. In the summer of 1933, the family had to move to Britain to escape Nazi oppression, and Brian's father Isidor had actually lost his job at Cologne University. Initially, the family lived in Ramsgate in Kent, but in 1934, Isidor was invited to lecture on Iranian religion at Oxford University. Unfortunately, Isidor died late in 1934. However, the family remained in Oxford, where Bruno was educated at Magdalen College School. Bruno went on to read classics at Oriel College in Oxford, beginning his degree in 1938. At Oxford, he was taught by two scholars who were to become hugely influential on his subsequent career. One of them was Sir John Beazley, who was Professor of Classical Archaeology at Oxford University, one of the leading scholars of his generation, and also a specialist in the study of Greek painted pottery. The other was Paul Jacobstall, an émigré German Jewish scholar who was also a classical archaeologist and an expert on the art of the Iron Age Celtic world. And here we can see an image of Brian in the 1930s, possibly taken when he was an undergraduate at Oxford University. Brian's studies were interrupted by the outbreak of the Second World War, and he was briefly interred in 1940 on the Isle of Man as an enemy alien. And this photograph shows the certificate he was given to prove that he was exempt from internment. After his release, Brian joined the British Army, and he anglicised his name so that he became Brian Shefton. During his army career, he was a member of the Education Corps and spent a lot of time delivering lectures on cultural topics. And here we have some of the records we believe he used when he was teaching classes on classical music. After the war, Brian completed his degree and then went on to spend several years studying at the British School in Athens. Here, he was involved in a number of excavations and visited many significant sites. Amongst these was the Temple of Apollo at Bassae, and also the monasteries of Mount Athos. And Brian actually managed to persuade the Greek navy to take him to the Athos Peninsula, which is quite a cut-off peninsula in the north of Greece. It was his visit to the Temple of Apollo at Bassae, though, which really established his reputation as a traveller who was willing to take risks and undertake intrepid journeys. He actually told me that he visited this temple, which is in the heart of a mountainous region in the Peloponnese of Greece, at a time when the Greek Civil War was still being fought. And he walked over 30 kilometers to reach this temple through the mountains. On his journey, he heard explosions and gunshots as fighting was still taking place. And on one occasion, he said he had to fend off a pack of wild dogs as well. And this intrepid travelling was something that Brian was to indulge in a great deal throughout his career. On his return to Britain, Brian took up a post teaching classics at the University College of the Southwest of England in Exeter. Here, he also worked on Greek archaeological material in the Royal Albert Memorial Museum in Exeter. From Exeter, he moved to Newcastle in 1955 to take up a post as a lecturer in ancient history at what was then King's College. And King's College later became the University of Newcastle upon Tyne, in 1963. Brian began collecting Greek archaeological material from the very first year he was in Newcastle. He was encouraged to do this by the rector of King's College, Charles Bosanquet, who later became the first Vice-Chancellor of Newcastle University. Charles Bosanquet provided Brian with some funds to buy some Greek pottery to support his university teaching. And from these small beginnings, Brian's collection began. Here we can see Brian in the 1950s and one of the very first Greek pots he is likely to have collected. This is a Cypriot tripod juglet. We also have some examples of the sales catalogues that Brian is likely to have looked at before deciding what objects to acquire for his collection. From small beginnings in 1955, Brian built up the collection until at the point of his retirement in 1984, it consisted of nearly 1,000 objects. The range of the Shefton collection is broad and it reflects Brian's varied interests. It consists of Greek pottery, metalwork, including Greek armour, and a number of terracotta statuettes as well. And I would strongly encourage you to visit the Great North Museum, Hancock, and see the scope of Brian's collection for yourselves once the museum reopens later this year. Brian was an energetic collector and a familiar figure in the London sale rooms of the 1950s, 60s and 70s. He used a combination of university funds, grants from organisations like the National Arts Collections Fund and private benefactors to build up a collection he regarded as his finest academic achievement. Over the years, this collection has moved around the campus of Newcastle University. In the 1950s, there was an exhibition organised in the Hatton Gallery, and here Brian was helped by Ralph Holland, who was an art historian based in Newcastle at the time. From there, the collection found a home in the Percy building alongside the Department of Classics. And here we can see the displays as the collection would have looked in the 60s, 70s and on into the 1980s. While it was in the Percy building, Brian was able to assemble a job creation scheme with a group of individuals who actually helped him to catalogue, interpret and conserve the objects in the collection. After it was in the Percy building, it moved alongside the Department of Classics to the Armstrong building in the 1990s. And here we can see what the museum looked like when it was in the Armstrong building. In 1994, the museum was actually named the Shefton Museum of Greek Art and Archaeology in honour of Brian Shefton. And here we have a photograph taken at the formal opening of the Shefton Museum of Greek Art and Archaeology. You can see Brian in the centre here, flanked by James Wright, the Chancellor, the Vice-Chancellor, sorry, of Newcastle University at the time, Sir John Boardman, the Lincoln Professor of Classical Archaeology at Oxford University, Brian's wife Jutta, and the curator of the collection at the time, Tony Sporforth. And here is Brian with Sir John Boardman at the opening of the Shefton Museum. Later, the collection was transferred to the Great North Museum, and this took place in May 2009. Also in 2009, the gallery in the Great North Museum was named the Shefton Gallery in honour of Brian Shefton's 90th birthday. And here we can see Brian unveiling the plaque that was produced for his 90th birthday. I want to now turn to have a quick look at what motivated Brian as a collector. Obviously, he wanted to develop the collection as an academic teaching resource, and object-based Greek archaeology teaching has been a crucial part of the collection's story. And here we can see various object-based lessons taking place in the 1970s, in the 1980s with Tony Sporforth, and then in the early 2000s as well. To complement the collection's role as a teaching resource, Brian also built up the library holdings in Greek art and archaeology and related subjects. And there are still shelves in the library that are designated as part of the Shefton collection. Brian believed that the library resources were a crucial complement to the archaeology collection he built up. Another motivation for Brian as a collector was his own research interests. Here we can see the very last object that Brian Shefton collected. This is a bronze jug, referred to as a rhodium bronze oinokoi, and Brian had studied these for a number of years and actually wrote a book in German about this particular category of object. And it was quite clear that his research interests made him want to acquire an example of this particular type of bronze vessel. Quite often, Brian's collecting benefited from serendipitous discoveries, and Brian really enjoyed making these kinds of discoveries. Here we have a terracotta part of a lion head water spout from a Greek building in southern Italy. Brian realised that the other half of this lion's head water spout was actually in the possession of a Swiss collector called Leo Mildenberg, and Brian persuaded Mildenberg to let him match up the two pieces to confirm that they were part of the same object. Brian also managed to persuade Leo Mildenberg to donate his object to the Greek collection on his death. So Mildenberg left the Shefton collection with his half of the water spout, which eventually came to the collection, and Brian was delighted by this, and it generated a great deal of publicity. Another example of a chance discovery concerns this bronze Macedonian spear butt. This is the bottom half of a long spear used by soldiers at around about the time of Alexander the Great. When this was cleaned in 1977, Brian realised that at the top of this spear butt there were the Greek letters Mu, Alpha, Kappa, which are an abbreviation of Macedon or Macedonia. This proved but this particular spearbutt was probably manufactured and stored in a state arsenal and was part of the equipment of soldiers, perhaps who served in the armies of Alexander the Great, or perhaps Alexander's father, Philip II of Macedon. Over the years, the function of the collection has changed. And one of the things Brian Shefton never really anticipated, but has become very important for the Shefton collection, is its schools programme. Hundreds and hundreds of children in the northeast of England have visited the collection and made use of the resources we have to help them learn about ancient Greece. We've even produced a guidebook that is there to help teachers navigate their way around the collection and use it as a basis for lessons on the ancient Greeks. We've even gone so far as to organise collaborative exhibitions that showcase the work we've done with local school children. This is an exhibition at Belsay Hall in Northumberland. We worked with Belsay School and with English Heritage and Newcastle University to showcase the children's work on the ancient Greeks. We were very pleased to be able to put this display on in such a prominent place. By the time of Brian's death in 2012, the collection was seen as a major asset, not just for Newcastle University, but also for the city of Newcastle and the North East in general. Brian, despite his wide-ranging travel and international connections, was very much an adopted son of the city of Newcastle, and he always felt proud to belong to the city and to the university. And this is reflected in the local response to his death, including this obituary in the Journal newspaper. Brian's final legacy is his vast archive, a collection of papers, correspondence, notebooks, photographs, and materials connected with his lifelong love and study of Greek art and archaeology. We are beginning to organise and understand this huge resource, which is going to allow us to unlock further information about the collection. Brian was one of the very last academic collectors, and his collecting activities were very much of their time. What was acceptable in the 50s, 60s and 70s is no longer the way museums operate. We believe that the archive will allow us to explore this particular moment in the history of collecting, as well as address some of the difficult histories of unprovenanced collections.